Apollo Justice Ace Attorney is the fourth game in the Ace Attorney series and acts as a soft reboot, switching out Phoenix Wright for a brand new protagonist, Apollo Justice. Apollo Justice was released on April 12, 2007. When it first came out, it got glowing reviews and sold really well. However, if you were to ask an Ace Attorney fan now what their opinion on the game is, it would be pretty mixed. A lot of people seem to love it and others seem to hate it. I want to know why so many people hate this game, so I'll look over the game, describe it, and then give my opinions on it at the very end, so stay tuned for that. And I would like to hear your comments about what you think of Apollo Justice Ace Attorney, if you think it's the worst in the series. Before I actually get into the game, I just want to let you know how the video will go. I'll give a very brief description of the case, mention like the suspects and stuff like that, then I'll list the positives and negatives, and then after that I'll give it a ranking out of 10. So let's start out the first case in the game. 4-1, Turnabout Trump. Turnabout Trump is the first case in the series, featuring Apollo Justice as the main lawyer, and it's alright. Before I explain why I think it's alright, let's actually get to the summary. This case has you defending a very familiar face, that being Maya Fey. Surprisingly enough, actually, it's not Maya being arrested, for this time at the very least. It's actually Phoenix Wright from the original trilogy. Phoenix is accused of murdering a man named Shadi Smith in the basement of a Russian ball club. Let's talk about the positives of Turnabout Trump. The first positive I have is for Christoph Gavin. He's the mentor of our main character. He's also known as the coolest defense lawyer in the West. There's also a lot of foreshadowing with Christoph, which is really nice, and it pays off at the end of the case. I like this new version of Phoenix. He's different from the old version, which brings up a really nice mystery of how he got here. The community is split on him, but personally I think the Hobo Phoenix is better than the Trilogy Phoenix. Although the main reason why I like the Hobo Phoenix is just because he's really, really hot. I also really like how, despite how Phoenix looks and acts, he's still as smart and perceptive as always, like whenever he altered the crime scene to trap Christoph in his lie to get him convicted, and using forged evidence to get him convicted. And for my final positive, I want to talk about the big twist of Turnabout Trump. I didn't mention this earlier, but I will be giving spoilers, although I'm pretty sure that was a given. But your mentor and someone on the box art, Christoph Gavin, is actually the murderer this time around. That is a genuinely really clever twist. I also really like how even after Christoph is accused, he still does maintain his cool, confident persona until you present the bloody ace given to you by some random female magician. Christoph asks if this is revenge for what happened years ago, which sets us up for a case later on in the game. This is fine enough. Those are the only real things I like, but there's also nothing I don't dislike. Olga Orly's fine, I guess. The victim is fine. The judge is fine. I don't like how Payne is in the case, actually. I just think Payne should have been switched with Christoph's brother, Clavier. Just make another case, that one being a filler case, then have fucking Clavier in this one. I really don't understand why we couldn't see his reaction to his brother getting arrested. Like, I know that there's a running gag in the Ace Attorney games that Payne, his ancestor or his brother, is always like the beginning prosecutor in a case, but really, just this one didn't need it. Either it didn't need it or they needed to add a new case into this one that would give Payne that role. Overall, I give Turnabout Trump a 5 out of 10. It's not bad, it's not good. I probably wouldn't replay it if I ever wanted to go back to Apollo Justice as much as I would, say, Turnabout Corner, which is actually our next case. So let's move on to that one. Number 2, Turnabout Corner. Turnabout Corner takes place 2 months after the first case. And this case has you defending the son of a gang family called the Kitaki family. However, last night there were 3 separate incidents, and they just so happened to be interwebbed with the murder. Your client is the son of Winfred and Plum Kitaki, named Waki. and he's accused of murdering a doctor named Palmaractus. I've heard people say that this is one of the worst cases in this game, and I am just genuinely baffled by how they could think that, especially when there's certain other cases coming up soon. The incidents were panty theft and Phoenix Wright getting hit by a car, which caused him to get launched into the air, hit his head on the top of the light pole, and only walk away with a sprained ankle. Absolute legend. The third and final crime that happened was a noodle stand being stolen. Murder. Now let's get into the positives about Turnabout Corner. Turnabout Corner introduces us to Trucy Wright, Phoenix's adopted daughter. And she is amazing, not just in design. She and Apollo have an amazing dynamic that's similar to Phoenix and Maya from the original trilogy, but it doesn't feel like a rehash of that. Speaking of Trucy has a lot of standout moments in this case, like whenever she fakes her own kidnapping using a prop named Mr. Hat, and then forces the trial to go on recess. Then, in the same case, when she points out the contradiction for Apollo so that the case can continue on to the next day. We're also introduced to Clavier Gavin, who I name-dropped in the previous case. He is unsurprisingly the brother of Christoph Gavin, our ex-mentor. I really like Christoph in this and pretty much every case he's in. He's such a nice breath of fresh air, because the previous games had Edgeworth, Franziska, and Godot, and while they're all good characters, they're all very much the same. They're just really mean to you at first. They have their reasons, but it still does get annoying after replaying all of them in a row. So, Clavier, being the exception and being a genuinely nice person, who's just so happens to be a prosecutor, is a great... He's also a nice twist on the cliche of a rock star being a douchebag. We're also reintroduced to the returning character of Emma Skye. Some people are mixed on how Emma's handled here. She's a lot more grumpy and cynical than she was back in Rise from the Ashes, where she was introduced. But honestly, I kind of prefer how she is in this game. It really fits the atmosphere of Apollo Justice as a game, being a lot more grounded than the other games. Although it is really weird how Emma got a higher position even though she failed the test. I guess Gumshoe must have got some serious clout in the 7 years since Trials and Tribulations. I actually really like how these three seemingly unconnected mysteries are connected. They're not connected because the mastermind is some criminal genius. It's just a bunch of people looking to get ahead that are close to each other. Also, the ending of this case is surprisingly emotional. I also really like how in love with Alita Tiala is, and I like how his parents don't like her. It's pretty clever whenever you get later on into the case. And speaking of Alita Tiala, let's get into the worst part. Alita. She's got two great moments. The first was when she hired you because she thought you were going to be a shit lawyer. And the second was when she was almost strangled to death by Palmaractus. He was planning on dumping her body in a river. Other than that, there's just nothing good about Alita. Her design is boring, she has zero personality, her motive is boring, she's not threatening, she isn't entertaining. She doesn't even have a cool breakdown. Her breakdown is just, I think they just copied and pasted her normal damage sprite without any changes. Wesley Stickler is a character I'm personally mixed on. He is a pretty funny character, especially since he forces Apollo to present panties 4 separate times. But as funny as he is, he's also pretty annoying, and he actively destroyed this case's reputation. It's just known as the panties case because of it. Clavier is an amazing character, though. I already talked about how Clavier is a great twist on the Ace Attorney prosecutor formula, but there are moments that nobody talks about, like when Trucy fakes her kidnapping, but he knows practically right away that it's fake, but lets the defense have a recess regardless, and doesn't tell anyone about it. Absolute GOAT. Guy Eldoon is a fine enough character. He has his moments, but honestly, I just wish they used the fact that he used to be a doctor more than they do, because he only kind of brings it up every now and then, and he's only useful once whenever you present Waki's chart that you get from Pal Maractus's office. It was just whenever he was to tell us whenever we bit the bullet. No pun intended either. A theme that's pretty apparent in this case is that nobody is as they seem. You have Wesley Stickler, a junior in college who wears a cap and gown, a family of gangsters that are surprisingly nice and respectful, Alita, the defendant's loving fiancée, being guilty of murder, and a gold digger. Overall, I would give this case an 8 out of 10. It has one weak point, but if I ever want to go back to Apollo Justice, this will be the first case I play. But I have to do the summary of the case real quick. The case starts with Apollo and Trucy shortly after the second case. They're at a Gavaneers concert, and during that concert, one of the characters we're introduced to, named Roman Latouche, is shot dead, and you have to go and find out who killed him. Before the actual murder happens, we're introduced to our main characters, so I might as well talk about them. You have the Borginian blind singer, Lemmy War, the blind pianist, Maki Tabai, the bodyguard and Interpol agent, Roman Latouche, and finally, Darian Crescent, a detective and band member of the Gavaneers. So let's start with the negatives. The first day of the investigation. It's a bit hard to describe, so I would try my best, but it feels incredibly aimless, like you're just investigating because you have to. It drags on the case for so much longer than it ever has to be. It's like, compare that to any other case, and it makes sense why. Every other case would have you talk to the witness, suspect, and then you could figure out why he is being suspected, so you have a general idea of what you're supposed to look for. But this case just doesn't do it. You're supposed to guess and hope that you get lucky. This case leaves you with zero reasons either. It's not like you slowly learn as the investigation goes along. No, that's not how it works. You go into the trial without knowing why your client is being suspected at all. It's really dumb. And what many people, even its defenders, cannot defend is its logic. The person you're defending is Maki Tabai, the blind, skinny, scrawny person from Borginia who killed Roman Latouche. And I'll show a picture of Roman now. The case itself even says that most people would have their arm broken if they aren't familiar with the type of gun that was used, that being a .45 caliber. Two other aspects this case gets shit for is that it shows you footage of Roman's last words and shows you footage of the band playing a lot. And yeah, that is absolutely terrible. I absolutely disagree. But that is honestly all I have a problem with. I find Lemmy War to be a very likable character. The mystery of her blindness was compelling, and the twist at the end of the game was genuinely amazing. The only problem I have with Lemmy War is that she's only referenced once in the second case of Spirit of Justice. The judge also has a surprising amount of good moments, like when he asks Apollo how he would talk to someone with an incurable illness, as well as when the judge thinks that the igniter is some kind of cell phone. I really like the sound mixing parts. It's a fun mechanic, and it wasn't as annoying as everyone says it was to me, although that's probably because I already knew beforehand. The second day of the investigation and trial is much better than the first day, probably because you actually have an idea of what you're supposed to do. Who would have thought that it's more fun to investigate when you actually know what to do? It has a much stronger sense of direction and cohesion. The pacing of, piecing together how Darian committed the crime is fun. That is all great. I like Maki as a protagonist. Yeah, he's a bit bland, I won't deny that, but I don't know, I like him enough. I also like the fact that he's guilty of cocoon smuggling and not the murder. That is Turnabout Serenade. Overall, I would give this case a 6 out of 10. This is probably my second favorite case in all of Apollo Justice Ace Attorney. Turnabout Succession takes place 3 months after Turnabout Serenade, and in it, you, Apollo Justice, are set to defend your client, Vera Misham, who is accused of poisoning her father using a poison called atraquin. He was supposedly poisoned during an interview with the GOAT, the legend, the beast, that of course being the fan favorite Spark Brushel. But before I do that, I want to go and talk about the positives real quick. I actually really like the Mason system. It's a bit confusing how it's never explained what it is. You could go back and forth from the present to 7 years in the past, but if you know what you're doing, it does make for a surprisingly good flowing investigative segment. And it's infinitely better than the first day's investigation segment. That was boring as hell. Even Trucy couldn't help it. Anyways, continuing on with the Mason system, I do actually want to talk about what room you have to go to in which order. The first is Wright & Co. law offices in the past. The second is courtroom lobby in the past. This third is Bolshevik Bowl Club Zach first visit in the present. Solitary Cell 13, Christoph first visit, present. Drew Studio, Drew and Vera, past. Detention Center, Valent, past. Drew Studio, Brushel, present. Bolshevik Bowl Club, Zach, second visit, present. Sunshine Coliseum, Valent, present. And Solitary Cell 13, second visit, present. Let's talk about the next positive, that being Christoph Gavin. Christoph as a character was a bit boring to me. The only real reason why I would remember him for a bit was because he stood out compared to the mentor archetypes, like say Mia and Kazuma from the original trilogy and from the Great Ace Attorney. Mia died and Kazuma faked his death and then that whole thing happened. But having Christoph in this case makes him a genuinely, really scary killer. There's a reason he's a fan favorite. At first, because this is like the first time I think I've ever completed Apollo Justice. I might have played it once before, but I clearly don't remember. At first I was curious, because why did people like him so much? Sure, he was good in the first case, but like, outside of the twist, he just didn't really stand out that much. But this case, like I said before, he was a genuinely terrifying killer. One of the most terrifying in the series. He was able to kill Drew Misham using poison while he was in solitary confinement, almost poisoned his daughter, and not to mention, he also ruined Phoenix's life by having everyone think that he forged evidence, making him lose his job. Hell, Christoph even almost got away with all of it. However, Clavier called out his bluff, which stopped it. However, a lot of people don't really like how some of the characters are written, and I completely understand for some of them. People like the Judge and Gumshoe, they are weirdly out of character, and I don't mind Phoenix being so confident, you know? He took down Police Chief Gant, he took down Manfred von Karma, a person who has never lost once in 40 years after taking on 3 cases, and Phoenix also sent the soul of his dead girlfriend back to hell. So I think his confidence is a good thing. I do think it makes sense. But everyone else is just, they're so out of character for no real reason. I'm gonna give this case a 3 out of 10. I genuinely will only replay it if I ever do a retrospective, another one on Apollo Justice, or if I'm just going to do a ranking every case in the Ace Attorney series video, because I genuinely just don't have the urge to even think about this case. So, my opinion on Apollo Justice Ace Attorney. I think as a game, it's terrible, to put it quite bluntly. At first I thought Justice for All might be worse, but the quality between Justice for All is, in my opinion, a lot more consistent than it is here. You have Turnabout Corner, which is probably the best case in the entire game, but then you get Turnabout Succession, which is my least favorite in the entire series. So I know this is different from my other videos, but I do want to talk about things that I like, and as much as I love Five Nights at Freddy's, It's just like, I need a little break, you know? I'm gonna talk about analog horror next time. Hopefully I could get that out within a week or two, because I do want to take videos a lot, like video making a lot more seriously.